12 craziest convicts reacting to a life sentence. If you've ever gotten a traffic ticket or been pulled over by a police officer, you likely know that dealing with law enforcement in any way is nerve-wracking.
Hey, hold on, I'll tell you what.
People who break major laws within the country, however, deal with it in a much bigger way. It takes a lot to be given a life sentence, and it's obvious that the people who receive them aren't exactly a fan of it. These are the 12 craziest reactions from convicts getting put away for life. Antonio Barbeau. Antonio Barbeau is one of the younger convicts on this list, unfortunately being only 14 years old. That doesn't take away from the brutality of the crime that he committed.
At 14 years old, Antonio Barbeau is a convicted killer.
However, he and his friend Nathan Pape were charged with first-degree international homicide for bludgeoning 78-year-old Barbara Olson to death. Olson was Barbeau's great-grandmother, and the only motive that was clear from the murder was that he stole her purse afterwards. A psychiatrist testified that Barbeau has cognitive issues stemming from him being struck by a car when he was 10, which may have affected his behavior. He himself has said that he does not feel emotions, which many believe is indicative of psychopathic tendencies. What's interesting, therefore, is the way he reacted in court. He claims to not feel emotions.
I know I don't show my emotions much, and I myself am not sure why.
And yet can be seen here crying when he's sentenced to life in prison.
But that doesn't mean I don't.
Was this a ploy for sympathy? Either way, we'll never know. The 14-year-old will be eligible for parole in 2048 when he'll be 50 years old. Tony Farmer. Tony Farmer is one of the most famous people on this list, especially if you're a fan of basketball. He was a promising high school star before he was convicted of felony domestic abuse battery, after his former girlfriend filed a complaint about an incident recorded by a doorbell camera. He was a top 100 ESPN recruit with very good NBA potential, but the arrest effectively ended his basketball career. He took on a new kind of fame because of what happened in the courtroom once the judge read out his sentence.
2 years on that count as well. Case 564206, the felony of the third degree, the court.
The man fainted and hit the ground fairly hard, and it became a meme of sorts to make fun of it for him. Unfortunately for Farmer, that's likely the only thing he'll ever be famous for.
Tony Farmer, 6'7", sophomore from Cleveland, Ohio.
Ky'Andrea Cook. Although this sentencing isn't focused specifically around what the convict did, it's still an interesting story regarding reaction to a sentencing in a courtroom. Ky'Andrea Cook pled guilty to carjacking with a deadly weapon in Daytona with her boyfriend at the time, who was also said to have shot somebody during the process. When the sentence was read out to her in court, Cook's face scrunched up in agony and she nearly collapsed in tears. But there was someone else in the room that seemed almost more heartbroken. As you can clearly hear, Cook's mother screamed over and over again that this wasn't right, and that they couldn't lock her up for that long. Unfortunately for her, that's exactly what happened. Jahleel Smith Riley. Jahleel Smith Riley is a man who pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and attempted murder, but funnily enough requested to withdraw his plea several months later. Riley is accused of forcing a man out of a car, going through his pockets, and then shooting him in the head, which he miraculously survived. His girlfriend in the car, however, did not survive when he leaned in and fired 2 shots at her. There was very little remorse in the way he did it, and yet by the way he reacted in the courtroom, it seemed he wants everyone to believe that he regrets it.
This is what I got.
Riley collapsed on the floor and sobbed, but was forced back to his feet with no second thought. He then said, "So what does he get?" And nobody really knows what he meant. It was likely just a last plea by a desperate man. Diana Lovejoy. Diana Lovejoy is a perfect example of a woman who should have never become a parent. She and her husband at the time had a child in 2014, but the stress of attempting to do so drove a rift in their marriage, and they divorced the same year. Custody was initially handed over to her, but later on, the court ordered her to split custody with her ex-husband and gave him $100 a month for child support. She could not afford to do so and instead attempted to murder her ex-husband. Luckily, the bullet missed his heart and he survived. Diana was arrested and convicted of attempted murder in court, and her reaction is definitely something to see. The woman initially faked some sort of seizure, according to many medical experts. Likely in an attempt to gain some sympathy. She then cried as she spoke, but very few seemed to have any sympathy for her at all. She had, after all, attempted to murder a father. Esteban Carpio. Esteban Carpio is a 44-year-old man that was convicted for killing a police officer while being questioned for an entirely separate murder. While Carpio was being questioned, one officer left the room to get water for him, leaving him alone with another officer. During that time, Carpio took the man's gun and shot him twice, killing him. Courts were mystified when Carpio came out wearing a mask, with his eyes and face completely swollen shut. Many people believe that this was a case of police brutality, but the mask was to prevent the man from spitting or biting in any officer's direction, as he'd been doing so for days. He tries to play it off as being dejected in court, but just minutes before he'd been kicking and screaming the entire way there. Ryan Stone. Ryan Stone is a 28-year-old man who led police on a dangerous car chase for over 60 miles, and then critically injured a state trooper. He stole a car with a 4-year-old boy in the back of it outside a gas station, then proceeded to carjack 2 other cars before crashing into a vehicle and fleeing police. Then, while in the courtroom for his sentencing, he attempted to say that he was a compassionate person that feels remorse for his actions.
Your zone, you have so many things going on in your life. Sometimes it's just hard to gain a wrap on your emotions. As he said, we are going through trial after that. It's a 1.5-week trial.
Despite what he said, it's fairly clear that this man has no remorse at all. He kept creepily calm the entire time through his statement, until the end where it seems like he almost pretended to get choked up. It's fairly eerie to watch someone that doesn't feel bad at all for kidnapping a 4-year-old. TJ Lane. TJ Lane at the time of his crime was a 17-year-old student at Chardon High School in Chardon, Ohio. On February 27th of 2012, he went to school with a gun and shot 6 students, resulting in the death of 3 of them. Witnesses have said that he had a rivalry with one of the victims, while the others seemed to be mostly incidental. He was originally going to be charged as a minor, but courts made the decision to try him as an adult. The video of TJ's sentencing went viral in the early 2010s, but if you haven't seen it, it's fairly chilling to watch. The boy felt no remorse whatsoever for his actions, even showing up to his sentencing in a shirt with the word "killer" written across the front of it. He also flashed the middle finger to the camera and overall acted horribly in front of the families of kids who died. It was a disgusting spectacle to watch, and it's good that he's permanently behind bars. Jacob Matt Morgan. Jacob Matt Morgan, aged 17, is a murderer and arsonist who set a fire that resulted in the death of his 14-month-old brother. The fire was ruled to have been set deliberately and with purpose, though the death couldn't be ruled as purposeful, meaning he was only convicted with involuntary manslaughter. Despite having set the fire on purpose, he appears in court sniveling and then even seems to begin praying, all the while crying.
Much more here than probable cause, so that's the court.
At the end of the sentencing, he cries out and begs to not be sentenced, saying "please" over and over before collapsing to the floor. Even if by some chance the murder of his brother was not purposeful, the fire was set on purpose around an infant, which should never be done in the first place. Martice Fuller. Martice Fuller was 18 at the time, and he shot and killed his ex-girlfriend and attempted to kill her mother in their home in May of 2019. The girl that he killed was only 15 years old at the time, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What's creepy about him is the way he just doesn't seem to care whatsoever. He sits and listens to the terrible things he did being read back to him and just stares.
Commit terrible crimes, they should not receive the harshest sentences, such as the state's.
Although he's wearing a mask and it's a bit difficult to make out exactly what he's doing, the mask isn't moving very much at all. And it leads to the assumption that his face isn't moving at all either. Most people in his situation would be crying or apologizing, but he doesn't seem to feel any remorse at all. Cases with silent criminals are always creepier for some reason. Danta Wright. Danta Wright is a 17-year-old boy who was convicted of murdering high school student Jordan Klee, who he fatally shot during a robbery. Her mother was too upset to be able to present her statement at the murderer's hearing, and had a close friend read it out for her instead.
I've lost the enjoyment of holidays and birthdays and of everything.
Despite what he had done, she seemed to even want to be able to forgive him, as Jordan's family was seeking closure and wanted to move past the traumatic event. Unfortunately, Danta Wright did not feel apologetic whatsoever for his actions. Throughout the entirety of the statement, the boy can be seen smiling and rubbing his hands together in almost maniacal fashion. He even specifically looks towards the camera and grins, showing that he knew exactly what he was doing. It was a disgusting showing of a lack of empathy, and it's horrible that Jordan's parents will likely never get the closure they desire. Dylan Schumaker. Dylan Schumaker at the time of his sentencing was a 17-year-old teenager who lived with his 19-year-old girlfriend at the time. She had 2 sons from previous relationships, while he had no children of his own. Despite this, he seemed to have taken them in as his own, until one terrible night where the monster within him was revealed. His girlfriend's 23-month-old son was crying, which evidently angered Dylan, who began to beat the child. Unfortunately, he did this to such a degree that the child passed away, and yet the man's behavior in court, it's chilling. At the beginning, he can be seen crying and blubbering that he did not mean to kill the child.
I didn't mean to kill Oscar. Actually, I really didn't. I really think I did.
And that this was all a mistake. When eventually he realized that it wasn't going to work, however, he stopped crying entirely, as though the entire thing was a show. It's very clear that he shows no remorse for his actions, and was only trying to save himself from as much prison time as possible. Luckily, he's going to rot behind those bars. It's certainly interesting to see the different reactions of convicts being sentenced to life in prison. Some are choked, others are in disbelief, and many are angry, as though they didn't believe that what they did was worth being put away forever. What do you think of the reactions of these convicts? Do you think any of them deserve less than a life sentence? Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments down below, and make sure to check out some of our other videos if you enjoyed watching this one.